Okay, so the day is June 3rd, 2024. The workday just finished up, and now I'm about to dive into the second part of the day, which mainly comes down to, again, content production and the building of the system necessary for the business, right? So I spent most of today, besides doing the stuff for the agency, primarily thinking deeply about what came next regarding my strategy for the content portion. I've delved in this before, where it was basically two parts of it, both the written part of it and the video portion of it. But I was very intrigued today primarily by the concept that I discovered when it came to gamification. In fact, specifically when it came to what I was looking at, and pulled up here, the exact quote that I learned, written out here, is that states, for brand, tell a story, meaning, of course, the idea is that when you have any kind of brand you want to develop, you need to be able to have a clear transformation journey or a clear direction, rising call to action, whatever it's going to be, a way people can resonate with what you're saying. For content, make a map, which means having a clear pathway people can go through. For example, if you have content of any kind, your goal should be to have it be in such a way where people can clearly latch onto it and then kind of have a pathway toward the goal that you kind of set up for them, whether that be the idea for, in my case right now, the pathway is to become a better operator and a better marketer. So the goal is to make sure I have all my content lead them on that path before they want to actually, pay money to learn more as far as more nuances of what I'm talking about. But the main one that I dove into primarily, which involved gamification, was the idea of for the product itself, the goal should be to create a realm or a feeling of gamification. Make it a game, essentially. So that was very resonant. That resonated very well with me specifically because I've been thinking a lot about not just the brand, not just the actual content portion of it, but when it comes to what I'm making, how to make it valuable, what should my strategy be to get a better understanding and a better feeling overall of making it achieve results that are consistent. Because the main thing I'm seeing in the industry is that there's so many people who want to market their product services around the idea of marketing and operations, but it always feels like it's from a place of where everything is just money and money's the goal. And it's very, very hard to kind of understand what really motivates people besides just the overarching feeling of well, I want to have this work for my business, I can make my money for my business, and I'll be happier if I make my money, which is, of course, not entirely the case. So instead, on the concept of gamification, I dove a bit into the idea, specifically from video games, funnily enough, where I kind of dove into understanding, all right, I looked and I searched for the idea of essentially what makes a great progression system. If I was going to gamify something, what should be done in order to make sure the game is actually it actually resonates with them, actually valuable, and makes them want to keep playing, And I discovered the idea behind gamification that they use in video games, for PlayStation or whatever it's going to be. And the idea they presented to me, which I kind of latched onto very quickly, was the concept of both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, where the idea is that intrinsic is essentially just the ability of you as an actual player in the situation, whether it be a player, a client, whatever it's going to be, depending on what your platform is. The intrinsic motivation comes down to your ability to put, basically and understand specifically in the way of your own mind, understand how to make things better and make that kind of goal an internal, well-defined, clear thing you want to latch onto, which again leads honestly to what is the most common in the industry, which is again money, success, the desire to have new things, the desire to achieve things that are intrinsic in our very spirit. We run from pain and we run towards pleasure, that kind of thing, right? So when it comes to intrinsic motivation, it's very important to understand what am I going to do to keep reminding them as a player or again as a user, as an actual client of mine, what makes them motivated, and make sure that stays top of mind throughout the entire process. That way they never lose track of it. Because intrinsic motivation is defined not so much by what you do, so much as it's defined specifically by what you aspire to do as you learn more, right? So you do one thing, let's say for example, you're playing a game of chess. The intrinsic motivation of chess comes from your ability to achieve mastery. It's not so much you make a move here, make a move there, but it's you make a number of consecutive moves, play games, win games, lose games, but then over time, you internally, learn new things to make yourself better as a chess player. That's the goal. So when I make a product of any kind, the intrinsic motivation should come from my ability specifically to want to achieve mastery, to achieve the goal that we set for ourselves, whether that be money, success, whatever it's going to be, but you should also have a desire to get better at the core of whatever it is you're building. So that's intrinsic motivation. Now, as far as extrinsic or external motivation, for example, again, external meaning outside of yourself, it has to be basically, it's a bit easier, but also falls more on me as a creator. For example, in the context of extrinsic motivation, the goal is to be able to instead of having to rely solely on them having their own motivation internally, is instead to basically set up dominoes or set up certain levels of difficulty, restriction, friction, whatever it's going to be, that they can then easily topple, achieve, overcome, and then be presented with new concepts or new challenges they can also kind of get in the way of. For example, if I use the idea of like chess being a measure of intrinsic motivation mastery, instead I can have the idea of any RPG, like an RPG, right? Let's say you play like Final Fantasy, Pokemon, whatever it's going to be. And the first thing you do in Pokemon, once you get a Pokemon, is literally you have a battle. You have an immediate battle the moment you get your Pokemon, which then motivates you to understand, all right, here's what I have, here's what I know, let's tackle this immediate challenge, and then let's go on our way to then find new challenges. So the goal behind external motivation or extrinsic motivation is to be able to clearly define and present obstacles that our client, our player, whoever it's going to be, can continuously be challenged by and learn from, basically by, instead of us relying on them having an idea, we instead say, hey, I want you to do this, please hit this target, please try to accomplish this. And this will hopefully, ideally, once you topple that, they get more and more challenging as you go along to then all of a sudden, let's say 5, 6, 7, 10 enemies down the line, or 10 challenges down the line, now all of a sudden they learn how to actually accomplish things. And they're all of a sudden, just by the nature of the challenge itself, better than when they started, right? So, for example, in the case of like about building a product or service, my thinking about this, because again, this came from a gaming background, my thinking about this right now comes from the idea of like, now my goal is to understand I could potentially set it up in such a way where like I have the information, because again, like about this too, is like I want to make sure that it's not too tedious. For example, like I want to not, if the goal is to set up challenges, I don't want to make it so that the player has to like do anything that's too tedious or annoying. So instead, what I'm thinking of doing is having it be in such a way where like the challenges are presented in the case of like either action steps or specifically like new concepts to attempt or new strategies to implement, where I allow them to kind of divulge and kind of consume the content itself, and then have them get smaller little things they need to try out. And in the very end, instead of it being the method of like a quiz, for example, I'm thinking of doing it in a way where it's like I present to them like a very, very in-depth like challenge they can go ahead and try to accomplish and knock down, but one that still makes sense in a way that they can actually apply to their business and achieve results from. So, again, simply put, there's two things I have to worry about regarding the business side of things I learned today, which comes from gamification, both intrinsic and extrinsic motivations are things that I have to consider. I have to build the business in such a way, or build the product specifically in such a way where I need to be able to let them both be reminded of what is the intrinsic motivation in their heart as far as what they want to accomplish, for the whole point of what they bought the product, while also giving them clearly defined goals and challenges to conquer and to get better at over time in order to make themselves a better operator in general, just by doing things continuously. So they stay engaged. So you put those two things together and all of a sudden you have a really good product or business. And that's my goal for building this out. So that's what I learned today, essentially. I'm going to dive right into essentially the writing portion of this, where I'm going to kind of just see what comes to mind, probably this, ironically enough, and then I'm going to go ahead and make sure I can have that be defined and written up. And today's the 3rd, right? So my plan is to have enough writings done by the end of this week so that I can go ahead and start scheduling stuff out and publishing to Twitter and making some real headway that way by actually having things be visible and usable once I kind of get the nuances down packed. Once that's ready to go, we're ready to go, and we're feeling pretty good. But other than that, I feel good. Let's dive into it.